Hi, I'm Chrissy Mack from Radio Northern Beaches, and you've just tuned in to the Listen and Chat with Chrissy Mack podcast. This is the space where we pull no punches, sometimes a little controversial, sometimes downright outrageous, and sometimes just packed full of information that is interesting to know. Today I want to talk about rewriting the housing blueprint, how governments can build homes and bring back 100% ownership. We'll be tackling the absolute elephant in the room. It's the topic that comes up at every backyard barbecue, every local cafe, and every family dinner table from Manly all the way to Palm Beach. I'm talking about the housing crisis. We all know the story. We look at our kids, our grandkids, and even the essential workers who keep the community running, our nurses, our teachers, our local retail workers, and we ask the question, how on earth is the next generation ever going to afford a roof over their heads? For decades, the standard answer from governments has been to throw money at the private market. Tax incentives, developer handouts, and complex planning schemes designed to get private developers to build a tiny handful of affordable apartments. But let's be honest, it feels like we're throwing buckets of water over a bushfire. So today we're going to do something a little bit different on the program. We're going to take off the developers' hats, bypass the corporate middleman, and look at a radical common sense blueprint. What if the government stopped acting as a bystander and went back to doing what it used to do best? What if the state and federal governments joined forces, picked up the tools, built the homes themselves, and sold them so that everyday people could completely 100% own their own home? It's entirely possible. The maths check out. We're going to break down exactly how it works. Stay tuned because we're rewriting the housing blueprint. To understand where we're going, we have to look at where we are right now. Right now, if a government wants to create affordable housing, they use a model called developer incentives. They go to a big private property developer and say, hey, if you make 10% of your new apartment building affordable, we'll let you build the tower 5 stories higher. Or they offer a massive corporate tax credit. Now, why do they do that? It's called the leverage method. The government thinks, well, if the developer spends their money to build it, we only have to chip in a little bit of taxpayers' cash. But here is the catch that trips up the whole system. Because a private developer is taking the risk and making the profits, those affordable houses usually have an expiry date. After 15 to 20 years, those apartments often revert right back to full market rates. The public loses out and the taxpayer gets nothing back long term. So what's the alternative? The alternative is the social asset model, where the government steps in as the master developer. And this isn't science fiction. Countries like Singapore have been doing it for decades. Over 8% of Singapore's population lives in high-quality apartments built directly by the government's Housing and Development Board. Now, when the government builds housing directly, the financial equation completely changes. Let's look at the maths. When a private developer builds a home, the price tag includes 3 massive costs. The cost of buying the land, the cost of the actual construction, and the fat 15 to 25% profit margin for the developer's shareholders. But if the federal and state governments team up, well, the state government can inject surplus public land or air rights over transport hubs into the project at a grand total of $0. Instantly, the biggest expense in Sydney real estate is wiped off the ledger. Next, you eliminate the developer's profit margin because government isn't trying to buy a super yacht. It's trying to house its people. Suddenly, the cost to build a beautiful, high-quality home drops dramatically, and that is where the magic happens for everyday Australians. Now, let's talk about how we actually build these homes without relying on private developers. We set up a joint federal-state public corporation. A massive team effort. The federal government brings the heavy-duty funding, the state government brings the land, and together they establish a permanent public workforce. Think of it like a modern state construction corps. Instead of putting projects out to tender for massive private construction conglomerates, the government employs the chippies, the sparkies, the brickies, and the plumbers directly. They become permanent sector employees with proper job security, great superannuation, and stable, localised hours. In a volatile industry where private construction companies are unfortunately going under far too often, the government can offer the one thing the private sector can't: absolute stability. But here is the most exciting part of this blueprint, and it's the part that really brings back the great Australian dream: 100% home ownership. In many modern housing schemes, you see things like shared equity, where the government owns a chunk of your house forever, or you're locked into a lifetime of renting. But in this model, because the building costs are so heavily compressed, thanks to the $0 land and the zero development margin, the government can sell these completed homes directly to first home buyers and essential workers at the actual cost of construction. When a young family buys one of these homes, they aren't entering a complicated lease. They sign the mortgage, they buy the property, and they own it completely, 100%. The deed is theirs, the keys are theirs, and stability is theirs. And what happens to the money they paid to buy that home? It doesn't disappear into a corporate bank account or line the pockets of offshore investors. Every single dollar of that sale income flows directly back into the joint government fund. The capital is completely recouped, the government gets its money back, and they instantly use that cash to fund the very next build. It is a self-sustaining, closed-loop system where public money stays public and everyday people get the security of full home ownership. If you've driven around parts of Australia lately, you might have noticed quite a revolution happening in the building industry. It's called modern method of construction, or more simply, modular and kit home building. Traditionally, building a house means waiting for the weather to clear, dealing with the mud on site, managing material thefts, and dealing with massive delays. But with kit and modular homes, the entire house is built on a literal assembly line inside a massive high-tech undercover factory. Imagine a joint government-owned home kit manufacturing facility. Inside this clean, controlled environment, our public workforce of carpenters, electricians, and apprentices work in perfect conditions. One team builds the steel frame, the next team does the internal wiring, and the next installs the cabinetry. The home moves down the line like a car in a factory, built to absolute precision. While the home is being manufactured in the factory, the foundations are being poured on the public land site at the exact same time. Once the modules are finished, they are loaded onto the back of a truck, driven to the site, and craned into place. A beautiful, sustainable, high-quality duplex or townhouse can be hooked up and serviced and completely ready to move into in a matter of days or weeks, rather than 18 months. By combining established private kit home builders for extra volume and setting up state-owned modular factories, the government creates a hub-and-spoke network. They can mass-produce homes using a standardised pattern book of beautiful pre-approved designs. This completely cuts out the years of painful local council delays and slashes construction costs by up to 20%. And remember the best part, because the efficiency is so high, the government can turn these out rapidly, sell them at cost to our locals for 100% full ownership, take the revenue, and roll it straight back into the factory to build the next batch. It's fast, it's smart, and it solves the supply crisis at its core. It's worth remembering that the housing crisis we face today isn't a natural disaster. It's the result of choices and economic models that have outlived their usefulness. We don't have to accept a future where our children are locked out of home ownership forever, or where the people who care for us in our hospitals can't afford to live within an hour of their workplace. By bringing together the financial muscle of federal government, the land assets of state government, the efficiency of modern factory-built kit homes, and the pride of the direct public workforce, we can build a new future. A future where the goal isn't corporate profit, but the simple, beautiful security of a home that you own 100%. And remember the best part, because the efficiency is so high, the government can turn these out rapidly, sell them at cost to our locals at 100% full ownership, take the revenue and roll it straight back into the factory to build the next batch. This is about bringing back the great Australian dream, but with a modern, common sense twist. And let's not forget the massive silver lining here. This blueprint completely solves the critical skills shortage facing our country. Right now, our traditional trade training system is under immense strain, and private builders often struggle to take on the long-term risk of training young people. But with a permanent government-backed construction pipeline, the state steps right back into the driver's seat as the ultimate training ground for our nation's workforce. Imagine a new generation of school leavers walking into a secure public site or into a state-of-the-art modular factory. They aren't just getting a temporary gig, they are securing a fully funded, gold standard public apprenticeship. By employing these young men and women directly, the government guarantees they get mentored by the best in the business, work under safe, stable conditions, and actually finish their qualifications without the fear of their employer going bust halfway through their training. We aren't just building houses here, folks. We are rebuilding the very fabric of our skilled workforce. We are turning out qualified carpenters, sparkies, and plumbers who will have secure, well-paid careers for life. It's an investment in bricks and mortar, yes, but more importantly, it's a direct investment into the future of our kids and our grandkids. And here is another beautiful piece of the puzzle. Where do we actually put these state-of-the-art modular factories? We don't cram them into our already crowded major cities. We build them in our regional areas. Think about the incredible ripple effect that has on a regional town. When the government establishes a major manufacturing hub out in the regions, it acts as an economic anchor. Suddenly, you have hundreds of workers moving to the area with secure long-term public sector incomes. And what happens next? A whole ecosystem grows rapidly right around that factory. You need local bakeries and cafes to feed the workers, local mechanics to service the fleet, and a grocery store to support the new families. This influx of people drives the need for upgraded infrastructure, better roads, improved public transport, and upgraded community services. It breathes fresh life and economic security into our regional communities, proving that it isn't just a housing strategy, it's a complete national building blueprint. Now, I know what some of the skeptics out there are thinking. Chrissy, this sounds fantastic, but how long does it take to actually build and set up one of these massive factories? We need houses now, not in 5 years. And you know what? That is completely a fair question. If we built these factories the old-fashioned way, buying raw land, waiting years for custom machinery, and designing every assembly line from scratch, it would take years. But we don't have to reinvent the wheel. I am advised we can streamline this setup process to get these plants up and running in a matter of months, not years. First, the government doesn't need to build the factory walls from scratch. They can immediately acquire or lease massive pre-existing industrial warehouses in regional hubs that are already sitting vacant. Second, instead of trying to figure out the manufacturing process on their own, the government can enter into fast-tracked public-private partnerships. Governments, like what we are seeing right now with the New South Wales budget initiatives, can launch competitive tenders to bring in established world-class modular operators. These private operators bring their pre-designed plug-and-play assembly lines straight into the government warehouse. And finally, because the government is using its own pattern book of pre-approved home designs, the factory tooling is made much simpler. You aren't setting up a complex plant to build 50 different types of custom buildings. You are setting up a streamlined line to build just 3 or 4 highly optimized uniform templates. By cutting out the red tape, utilizing existing buildings, and copy-pasting proven factory layouts, we can have the first public kit homes, I am told, rolling out off the assembly line and onto the back of the trucks in less than a year. The speed of the setup matches the speed of the build. Now, let me pause right there, because I can already hear some of you saying, hold on a second, Chrissy. You said we were cutting out the private sector, but now you're talking about public-private partnerships to set up the factory. Isn't that just letting developers back in through the back door? It's a brilliant question, but here is the vital difference. We are hiring a toolmaker, not a partner. When you involve a private property developer, they own the project, they dictate the prices, and they walk away with the lion's share of the final profits. But under this factory model, the government is simply paying a fixed one-off fee to a specialist manufacturing firm to install the machinery and set up the assembly line layout. We would be using private expertise for a fast setup, but keeping the public wealth exactly where it belongs, with the people. I know exactly what you're thinking. Chrissy, this sounds like a dream, but where on earth are you going to find the tradespeople to staff these factories and build the sites? We already have a massive skill shortage. And you're spot on. Right now, Australia is short tens of thousands of tradies. But here is how a government-led model completely solves the workforce puzzle, and the secret lies inside the factory doors. First, we fix the apprenticeship leak. Did you know that nearly half of all young Aussies who start a trade apprenticeship drop out before they finish? They quit because private builders run out of work or unfortunately go bust, leaving these kids stranded. But a government factory offers absolute public sector job security. We can give these young people a guaranteed, gold standard 4-year pipeline of work. They know they'll finish their ticket, and that instantly creates a massive wave of new, fully qualified sparkies and chippies. Second, we open the door to the other half of the population. Right now, women make up less than 3% of frontline trades. Traditional building sites with erratic hours and constant travel all over the city are tough for anyone trying to balance a family. But a high-tech modular factory, well, it's undercover, it's safe, and it's a stable 9-to-5 job in one fixed location. Experts tell me that if we make construction look like modern manufacturing, we can attract tens of thousands of women into the trades, virtually wiping out the skill shortage overnight, is what they say. We don't have a shortage of people willing to work. We have a shortage of smart, stable working environments. This blueprint fixes both. Now, there's one more piece to this puzzle that we have to talk about, and it's the ultimate gridlock for any new neighbourhood: infrastructure. Water, electricity, sewage and roads. We've all seen private developers stall for years because they're waiting around to get plugged into the grid. You might be wondering, Chrissy, how do we get the pipes in the ground fast enough to match these quick build kit homes? Well, we look at what already works. Organisations like Landcom are brilliant at this because they use what's called an accelerated infrastructure fund. Instead of waiting for homes to sell to pay for the services, the government injects the capital up front. They lay the pipes, build the roads and run the wires before the homes even leave the factory floor. But under our joint government model, we take it a step further. Because this is a priority public project, the state government can grant these sites critical infrastructure status. That legally pushes them to the absolute front of the line for utility connections. No waiting in administrative queues for months on end. And out in new regional hubs, we can think smart. We don't have to wait years to drag heavy power lines across the countryside. We can deploy localised community solar microgrids and modern self-contained modular waste systems that can be dropped into the site and operational in a matter of weeks. By funding the infrastructure first and utilising modern micro-utilities, the ground is completely ready and waiting the exact same day the trucks arrive with the houses. It's seamless, it's fast, and it completely unblocks the system. Now I can hear the bureaucrats in the back room saying, Chrissy, this would require a massive new empire of government departments. The red tape alone would choke the project. But here's the inside scoop. We don't need to create a single new government department. The machinery is already sitting right there on the factory floor waiting for someone to turn the key. At the federal level, we have Housing Australia, Right now, they act like a bank, lending taxpayers billions to private groups. Under this blueprint, they simply pivot to become the direct equity partner, providing the raw cash to fund the public factories. And right here in our own backyard, the state government recently created Homes New South Wales, one massive powerhouse entity that brought all the different housing departments under one single roof to slash through cross-agency red tape. In fact, Homes New South Wales is already running trials on modern methods of construction and prefabricated housing. The infrastructure is here. The executives are hired. The mandate to initiate is already on their desks. We don't need new departments, we just need a new direction. We need to tell these existing agencies to stop serving the speculative developer market and start directly serving the Australian public. The tools are in their hands and the blueprint is ready. So, which governments are going to be game to make the changes? You know, it makes me think, do we need to start a massive nationwide Australian chicken dance right now? Maybe we could do a collective on the internet. I'm not talking about the goofy wedding reception tune where you clap your hands like a beak. No, I mean the classic, unmistakable playground strut. You know the one, shoulders hunched, elbows out like wings, flapping away to call out anyone who's too scared to take on a challenge and find the nerve to carry out this new blueprint. Let's see who has the backbone to stand up to the developers and who is just going to balk and run away. Well, that's it for my rant today. As usual, these are my thoughts and my opinions and not necessarily anybody else's. Don't forget to follow, like and share. Stay safe, and I'll catch you next time.
Look at this, George Street. Look how many homeless. Look at these poor guys. Look, and a poor dog. How could this happen in a rich city? How can this happen? Look at this, and you're complaining about your cost of living? Look at these poor people.